hi everyone, welcome along. It's Jonathan Corrie. Welcome back to the Precursive podcast. For those rejoining, welcome back. Again, I've got my radio voice on for you all. And for those joining again, welcome to the show. In these conversations, I always feel very lucky because I get to talk to people who are frankly much more experienced and smarter than I am about topics that I'm very passionate about in the world of customer success and services in B2B tech. And so we talk to people in scale-ups, in enterprise businesses, startups, and across, and boutique consulting companies is one of the ones I was talking to today. Now, on this show, I am very excited because I have Amanda Berger, who is the SVP of Customer Success at HackerOne, which is a super interesting business, Amanda. So welcome to the show. How are you?
Thank you, Jonathan. I'm great to be here.
I'll let you introduce the scope of what you do, and if you don't mind, maybe we start there and tell us a little bit about the business and what you guys do, because it is super interesting.
Sure. So, hi everybody. So, I run customer success at HackerOne, and HackerOne is interesting and like a little bit different than a lot of the other companies I've worked at, which has been, all sort of technology companies. So first of all, HackerOne is a platform that sort of matches ethical hackers with corporations and also government agencies who want to work with those hackers, who maybe want to have a bug bounty type of a program, but don't know how to do it, or don't know how to attract hackers or how to attract hackers that they feel comfortable with. So we match those two. As the head of customer success, my role is to really do everything outside of the technical platform that makes those relationships gel and work really, really well. So I have a team that's a little less than 100 people. We do 5 real things. We start from when there's already customers acquired. We have hackers. We have about 1.2 million hackers, about 1,000 customers, and we help make sure that the submissions to the customers around vulnerabilities are valid. We help make sure that they are unique. We have a team that does that. We have a team that manages the programs. We support the customers. We help them think about what else they can do and how they can scale hacker-powered security. So those are all the things that are within the scope of what my team does.
Wow. So in effect, I would, if I was maybe a corporation or a government, I would hire you guys to try and break into a system or something of that ilk to test its vulnerabilities and its security. Is that?
Yeah, we expose the vulnerabilities before somebody who might be acting with not as great an intent as we have does. So we really are here to help make the internet safer.
Yeah. Well, when we were chatting before, I think I was trying to think of the movie where there's the hackers in it, and I think it's Transformers, which I took my kids to. So I've just got this idea of the folks that are in your community, which is a bit cliched, but it's super interesting. And so we explore then also in these conversations the world of like services delivery, because prior to your, I think like the last 5-6 years you've been in customer success type roles, and then prior to that doing a lot in the world of professional services and consultancy. Is that fair?
Yeah, I mean the last I spent a lot of time in publicly traded companies on sort of an on-prem model before there was even such thing as like customer success, and I ran professional services, which we sort of did the same thing customer success does, to be honest. And then I sort of moved to the Bay Area, got bitten by the startup bug, and the last 6 years I've spent at sort of late stage startups running customer success, which encompasses professional services for sure. But I guess with a little bit of a different lens, because earlier in my career, we were really focused on PS profitability and it driving the bottom line. And now we're really focused on, customer satisfaction and customers who stick with us and things like that.
Yeah. The route to revenue via NPS and customer satisfaction, not from 30% margins or
exactly.
Such. So, yeah, very much so. A nicer place to be, shall we say? I would say.
Yeah, I mean, I think there's benefits to both, but certainly I do like this model where we really get to think about customers more holistically and solving sort of grander problems than just sort of plugging in solutions. So I do like it.
I bet you don't miss the 18-month lose the will to live implementations though.
So. I do not miss that. Right. There's some things you don't miss.
Yeah, absolutely. And so within so something just I talk a lot about and just we as a business, we're often talking to our customers about the outcomes that they want to drive. In our world, it's a lot of focus around time to value, the quality and the velocity and quality really of services delivery, because there's this kind of high velocity services model that we often work with, which is companies dealing with they've got very liquid working environments, high volumes of customers, high rates of growth, and it's very different to perhaps some of the challenges in the on-prem world. And that's all happening within this new remote reality, right? And you took on your current job right around the start of the pandemic, did you not, I believe?
I did. I've been here for a year and a few months. So when I started the job, it was like that time last year that we were all sort of, Lysoling our packages and scared to leave the house.
Yeah. And so how, what's changed in the world of CS in the last, 18 months, really? How have you seen it affect things?
Yeah. Well, I think the first thing, and this is probably more of a startup thing, is that, I'll start with one thing I loved about PS is it was very clear what people were doing. Like people logged their time. It was very clear if you wanted to say, okay, this is what we're spending time on. This is what we're not spending time on. The data was obvious. And I think in CS, particularly in sort of the startup world, it's less clear. And when you are all in the office together or you're traveling to customers together, you sort of get some real clarity around that. But then moving to a digital world, it's hard to get that clarity. So when you say things like, well, how long does an implementation start? You take, it's sometimes less clear because you're not logging those hours. You're saying, well, it takes, 8 weeks is our average time to value. But then you're saying, well, how many of those hours in that 8 weeks are you actually spending? And it's less obvious. So one thing that I've really found is that data and outcomes and being able to look at things analytically is more important now that we're not sort of all sitting in a space together, knowing exactly what people are working on. That's one thing. And then, I think the last several startups I've been at, they were really collaborative. And so was HackerOne for sure. But there was a little bit of like, if there was a problem with the product, you just walk over to engineering or you just like walk over to product. And maybe if they weren't all in the same building, somebody was, and you just sort of walk over and you overhear things. And so you don't have that anymore, right? You don't overhear things. You just have to, I think, I spent a lot of time on things like Slack, trying to sort of virtually overhears to get a real sense of what's going on. So there are definitely some changes, but I think it's you can still get to the same result. But I would say outcomes, data is more and more important in this sort of digital world.
I love that phrase virtual over here. I'm 100% stealing that. I have this thing where it's like, I don't want to ask stupid questions. So I never want to ask our head of services, hey, where are we at with that project? Because I can just look in Precursive because we have a tool for that, right? But like you say, like there's that, it's the why. So for example, I was looking at a piece of work and I could see that it was late, like as in, and I'm not concerned about that because stuff's sometimes late. And I could also see why. But like you say, if I was in an office, I would get the context to that, right? And to find that out, I've now got to book a meeting or include it as an agenda item or remind myself in the next meeting to ask why, in which case I may have forgotten. So I think that, that digital era is certainly something. When you say the shifts that we've seen in the last 18 months, right? Which of those, what are the key ones that you've seen? And do you think that some of those will continue?
I do. I think, first of all, we've seen that we don't need to have everybody near where their customers are not as big as we sort of thought. Like we used to sort of think if we're going to have someone calling customers in New York, they have to be in New York, but it sort of matters less, I think now. I think we'll continue seeing that. I think we've realized that tapping into more of a global world is really a promising and wonderful thing to do. I think we've also found that Zoom is an incredibly effective tool, but before I would find that like you would have meetings and some people would be on Zoom and some would be in a room and you'd see sort of the back of people's heads or you'd sort of see the top of a whiteboard. And now I think we've learned that like all of us having a level playing field when it comes to Zoom, when it comes to having this kind of meeting is much, much more effective. And I think we'll be able to use those things and apply them to the work world no matter what happens. And that will be a positive thing.
Okay. And so you know, your team is working with your clients and you've got these different forms of engagements, right? You've got something that's, for example, quite like private, and then you have let's say projects which you open up to your community. So is there this idea of like outcomes on an ongoing basis in your organization? Like, it's a very hot topic elsewhere, right? About how do we deliver like value and outcomes on an ongoing basis. So in your organization, one of the things we talked about previously was you've got this sort of private engagement where you will engage the hacker or hackers on more of an individualistic basis, and then you've got something that you open up to broader communities. So I would imagine, like, is the initial outcome, for example, that the client's looking for is like testing maybe an initial vulnerability? Is that an example of like what are some of the outcomes that your clients are like looking for? Just to begin with.
So they're looking for vulnerabilities, and they're looking for I mean, ideally they're looking for really severe vulnerabilities that would have been easily exploitable or dangerous. You know, when we find vulnerabilities like that, that's a really great tangible evidence that it was a fantastic job to engage us. So sometimes they're looking for vulnerability volumes, and sometimes they're looking for vulnerability severity. But those are the kinds of things that they are looking for from us.
Okay. So here's a question for you that is a follow on to that then. So if I'm a company and you like, you know, this idea of like, okay, we can deliver value over time, right? So let's say, for example, that like we were, you know, like a CRM solution, right? Like take Salesforce, right? We're going to continue to use that year over year because as a business, we continue to try and sell things and grow our business year over year. If I'm a customer of you guys and you guys, I don't want to be finding vulnerabilities year over year. So I'm curious to know, how does that, is it that the world of hackers and threats is continually evolving and people are basically getting better? Is that kind of...
Yeah. You don't ever get to say that I'm like breach proof now, right? Like security, you never get to say that. Like I've done all my work, I'm done with security. Unfortunately, it's ongoing. And also, you know, our customers release new assets, they release updates, you know, that they're constantly doing more and more no matter what too. So the scope of, you know, maybe we start working with customer on just one, you know, their mobile application, and then they end up using us for much, much more than that. So they're both possibilities. You know, hopefully security hardens over time and, you know, does get more and more secure, but hackers, and when they, you know, get more sophisticated as well. So there's more and more opportunity. I mean, like I said, security is, you're never done with security.
Right. Okay, totally makes sense. I probably sound totally idiotic asking that question, but there we go. So the other day we were having a chat, and you were talking about some of the work that you're putting in your own organization at the moment about focusing on the first step in the customer journey around onboarding and the initial period. We're big believers that you know, success starts with onboarding. And why in your world is that, and in your experience, why is that first step in the customer journey so important to long-term success?
Well, one of the reasons is because we're pretty disruptive. So a lot of times we'll work with companies that have never had a bug bounty program or a vulnerability disclosure program and have never worked with hackers before. So sometimes there's some nervousness, to be honest, like, you know, who are these people? Like, I don't know who they are. I don't know where they're from. And, you know, what are they doing in my environment? So helping our customers feel comfortable is really important. And then sometimes our customers will get an onslaught of vulnerabilities. Like they'll get so many that they have to figure out like, okay, how do I remediate these? How do I integrate with my own systems to make sure that we're addressing the most severe things first? And so getting all of that set up so the customers really ready to address what's found is very, very important as well for ongoing success. So I would say there's a sort of a wide variety of reasons that how we start is important. And then I also say, like, the other piece of it is we need to attract hackers to work on the customer's program. So how we set up the rewards for hackers and the incentives for hackers is important as well, because we want hackers, especially there's some customer names that you might start having programs with that hackers will just be so excited about, but that's not everybody. And we want to make sure that we are attracting the right hackers to hack on the right things at the right time too.
Okay. Yeah, it's fascinating. And so what are some of the things that you, like, as you, like we talked about, you're putting some focus into this area at the moment. Everyone wants to be driving. I mean, the commonality that we see across the market is just, how can we create more consistency, make it more scalable? Like you say, you're dealing with 1,000 customers. That's hopefully going to be 2,000 customers, and so on and so forth. So what are the things that you focus on during the onboarding phase to improve time to value? What do you feel like are some of those important areas?
Yeah, it's interesting. We've done a pretty significant customer journey mapping project this year, and thought a lot about sort of how you start the journey. The first thing is identifying what journey your customer is on. Like, what are they trying to get out of this? And I'm sure this is true in every different vertical, but for us, some customers are trying to implement a program like this because they want their customers to feel safe and to differentiate from their competitors because they have so much security. And so that's like one value we might map to, is sort of brand trust. Other times the customer has been breached and they want to make sure that never happens again. And they have sort of specific areas they want us to focus on. And that's sort of another thing that we want to map to. Or maybe they've acquired a company and they want to make sure that they're secure. So I think it's really understanding and aligning with the customer's goals in the beginning to make sure that we're delivering the kind of success that they want to see, and that we're sort of very aware of what's driving this project and who we're working with to make sure that we deliver results. We've seen that be super critical and a super important part of the journey, kind of figuring out, like, what boat are you even on? Like, where are you trying to go? I think that's really important. I think time to value is always important because business is moving really, really fast these days, and being able to deliver results is fast. There's also so much SaaS explosion, I think, in this sort of new virtual world. Like, you have a lot of companies that have like one SaaS provider for every one employee that they have. I've heard this from tons of customers. And so making sure that, like, we're driving results is really important.
We have that. I can confirm that. Though, I mean, we're not as big as you guys, but if we were, so we have a 1-to-1 ratio. The way that you put that, it sounds like there's this almost like you would have customers pre-working with you that would almost like conceptually understand what it is that you're going to do, but then when you get into it, it's almost crystallizing in their mind of the implications of that, and then the steps to that, and all of these types of things. It feels like is that something, and that's why it's so important that you give them that guidance on the path and them that comfort, I guess. Absolutely.
I mean, they have a sense of it, and what we do is pretty cool. So they might think it's like a cool thing to do, but then, their sense of it might be that they're going to get, I don't know, X number of vulnerabilities, 20, and that's what they're set up for, but they get 80. And then, they got them, they have to remediate them and fix them. So it's helping, helping set up expectations, make sure that the work that we do, which involves a third party, which is our hackers, because we are a marketplace really, and making sure it all lines up. My team spends a lot of time sort of aligning on those things. And our sales team is really great, and they are very good at setting up the stage in the sales process. But then sometimes, you discover something when you get going, and it's a bigger deal or different than what you thought you were going to find.
Yeah, I was going to say, like, that's such an important area, right? The dovetailing between the commercial organization, the sales team, and the success organization. What have you done in the current world, and maybe also in previous lives, around smoothing out that transition? Because I hate the word handover. No customer wants to be handed over, but I guess the transition is the better one that I stole from Jay Nathan. So hi Jay for listening. But yeah, how can sales and CS improve that transition in your view?
I am like a religious believer that for big enterprise accounts, you can't do this with every account, but your biggest accounts, that CS should be engaged during the sales process at a certain point.
100%.
And
Yep.
I'm pretty scientific about it. Like, I think it's about when you're 70% along the sales cycle, you're talking about like actual solutions. I think the CS team needs to be engaged. We need to make sure that we're delivering on what's promised. What's promised is realistic. And also, everywhere I've worked, the CS team was a huge differentiator, like a wonderful CS team that I think would only make customers feel like they're going to be in great hands. So I think that's all super critical.
Yeah, no, definitely. I mean, we certainly do that, and it's. I also think actually customer success genuinely does enjoy that as well, because they feel like they're building a relationship sooner, and there's that familiarity. Like, particularly if you can keep the consistent, like the person that was there pre-contract and post-contract in place.
I mean, I think it's also important. Oh, sorry, go ahead.
No.
I was just saying, I think it's important because sometimes somebody's involved during the sales cycle that then passes it off and says, all right, you know, you team, you got it. And so being able to report back to that person and having that relationship is pretty important as well.
Absolutely. And I know how passionate you are about your staff and people. You know, this is something that I also am. I think people are our most valuable asset. They're not commodities. And I'm glad that the world is tuning into this a lot more. I think the West Coast of America is one of the drivers of that. Absolutely. So we were going to talk a little bit about like employee engagement in, you know, the new remote reality, or the remote reality. It was new 18 months ago, and that staff engagement has risen to the top of the agenda. So why is that such a priority for you and your team? I mean, it's a bit of a facetious question, but what?
Well, I mean, I think, you know, as a company, people are the most important thing that we've got. And we are a company of connecting people to other people. So our own people are absolutely critical. And you know, I think it's important to make sure that we're creating career paths and possibilities for people. The world that we're in now, first of all, like the sort of Silicon Valley startup, plus the whole like hacker world is pretty young in terms of like, there's a lot of people in jobs and who want to work in those jobs they're young. They've had 1 or 2 years, you know, years of experience or 1 or 2 jobs. And I think really helping them figure out where they can best contribute and developing them is such a wonderful thing. One of the things I really like about the late stage startup is that you've got change, you know, you iterate and things change. So there's always new possibilities for what people can do, but you also have a little bit of money because you're a late stage startup and probably pretty well funded. And so it's a wonderful position to be in, to like realize that if you had a person doing, you know, whatever function, you'd function better, you function more smoothly, and then realizing that you have the power to put that in place and you have a person who would love to do that job. That's kind of one of the most wonderful things about where we are today, I think.
Yeah, I love it. We're not where you are today. Like we're obviously still a small business, but we will not be for forever. But I think it's always where stuff that falls through the cracks is where you don't have someone dedicated to it.
Yeah.
Right? And when you're a startup, we're more of a scale up now, but it's still the case. It's like, you know, you can't do everything well if you don't actually have the relevant person, and it can't be done off the side of someone's desk. So that definitely resonates with me. And career development is something that, you know, in my time working in a big corporate was very formalized, right? It was, you go into a meeting, did you meet expectations, exceed expectations, etc., and all of that stuff. With remote working, how has that career development changed for you and for you guys?
It's definitely different, to be honest. You know, especially when you're working with people that are across time zones and there's no like, even though we're all remote right now, well, we have an office, but we're not there much. You know, I do regularly like see people that work for me, like we have lunch or something, but people in different time zones, you just don't get that. So There's a couple of things I've realized are important. One is like you have to get to know people, and you're just not going to have that chatter of being in the car after a meeting. So you have to find other ways to have that chatter. And so I think it's important to reserve some time in meetings to get to know people and what motivates them and who they are. I think I found that like the fun Slack channels are also good for that. I think it's important to know people holistically and not just two-dimensionally, and it's hard. I also think it's important to realize that there's some different roles that might make sense digitally, and there's different ways to do work. And so, like when I talk about like customer journey, in the past, you probably would lock 3 really smart people or 5 really smart people in a conference room, and you'd come out with a really robust whiteboard, and then you turn it into something. Well, you just can't do that in a digital, an only digital environment. And so being able to identify like, okay, there has to be an owner, and maybe that owner should be somebody who actually works with our customers every day and isn't just a theoretical operations person. And how do you enable them to put their thoughts onto paper in a scalable way? So those are a lot of the things that I found to be challenging, but also have given, I think, a lot of opportunities to people to be able to take ownership and work on a problem from beginning to the end.
You find, sometimes I find though that when people now have almost become so used to, like, you start a meeting and a lot of people sometimes will just go straight into it, right? And then the meeting ends and it really ends. There's no chit chat at the end of the meeting and something like that. And so your point around like making the time to get to know people, I also think that actually people have to get used to being gotten to know. Right? Like, because some bits they're like, okay, I know you want to talk about this, and it's like, well, actually, how are you? What have you been up to? What's going on? You were telling me that you're having your house done, and there's been no banging, by the way. So whoever is building Berger is silent as a mouse. But do you know what I mean? Like people, it's weird, isn't it? That it is weird that you've got to train yourself to.
It is weird, but then there's other weird things that make it easier. Like I know who's got a cat now. That's for sure. Like.
Yeah.
So it's just remembering to note those things and to, I don't know. It is a whole different world though, for sure, that we're in right now.
Yeah. Well, I got the best one. My 4-year-old Arthur, he came in, Artie Pants as we call him. So Artie came in and he loves doing so Google Slides. He loves doing he loves colors and collages and all of this type of thing. But anyway, so he comes into a meeting and he switched on Spotify and then managed to find some sort of like techno. And I don't listen to techno anymore. I'm a bit old for that. But he managed to find some techno. Couldn't work out how to switch it off. He then managed to get the whole screen to flip. Don't know how he did that. He just like pressed a few buttons, and this all happened at the same time. And I was like having a meeting. I was like, I guess that's the end of the meeting, because it's going to be a little bit awkward to try and talk through some banging.
Oh my gosh! I know.
It was something else.
I have 3 kids, 6 and under, and I can tell you that especially my toddler has shown up at a lot of my meetings. So, but it's also kind of nice, right? Like. It's kind of nice to be able to, share a little bit more of yourself.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, listen, thank you ever so much. I really enjoyed having you on. I think it's a fascinating world in which you work, to be honest. And it is. I think it's definitely probably one of the most different propositions that we've had on the Precursive podcast. So thank you ever so much for your time. I really appreciate it.
You're welcome. Thank you so much.
Brilliant. Take care, Amanda.
All right. Bye-bye.